Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo! I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers reporter for Buha's Block, and welcome to another episode. On today's show, I am thrilled to be joined by Cranjis. We've not spoken to in almost 4 months. The last time we podcasted together was before the Lakers Timberwolves series, and we were waxing poetic about liking the Lakers odds in that series. And a lot has changed since then. The Lakers lost in 5 games. The team was sold. Luka extended. LeBron opted in. There was some drama along the way. But Tim, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that. Yeah, didn't go the way we thought, certainly,
No.
and definitely not the way I was thinking. So many things, from the rotations to some of the scheme to, of course, like Luka being sick and very clearly down the one game. Like, not what we expected. Credit to Minnesota. Yeah, but a very long time ago, so much has changed, so much has happened. The roller coaster of emotions I certainly went through over the offseason. I was on the road and I joined in for your free agency initial reactions pod, and I listened to you basically break no news for about 2 hours, other than Jake LaRavia. So slow start, DFS not going the way we were hoping, but I feel like LA's pivoted really well and are in a much, much better spot than I expected. And they've taken the right kinds of upside swings on guys like Marcus Smart and DeAndre Ayton that I feel like we almost bought in at the floor. And if they can just give us their norm or get close to the ceilings we've already seen from them in prior seasons, like those are the kinds of upside moves this team needs to be able to find value and potentially be a title contender next year. So I am very pleased with them, enjoying my offseason, happy to talk some hoops. And this exercise really got me in the mood for, I don't know, going and touching some grass, but also basketball. Because it is such a logic puzzle trying to figure out how to put a rotation map together.
So as Tim just alluded to, today we are going to be breaking down the Lakers rotation, looking at last season's rotation and some of the trends that we could spot from that, then looking ahead to this year's rotation. And it is early and we don't know yet how things are going to shake out in training camp. There still is time technically for the Lakers to make another move. Seems unlikely. They're about $1 million away from the first apron where they're hard capped at. They do have an open roster spot, but with the way things are structured currently, they would have to do some sort of consolidation trade to open up the flexibility to sign a free agent or just do a trade to add a player that way. So for now, it looks like the dust has settled on the offseason. And a quick recap, Lakers are sold to Mark Walter and TWG Global for a NBA record $10 billion valuation. Luka just extended last weekend, 3-year, $165 million deal. LeBron opted in right before free agency started. As you said, they added DeAndre Ayton, Marcus Smart, Jake LaRavia, and Adu Thero. They re-signed Jackson Hayes, and they lost Dorian Finney-Smith, Jordan Goodwin, Shake Milton, Markieff Morris, and Alex Len. So with that recap out of the way, let's take a look at last year's rotation. So I went through and looked at there's 15 games last season post-Luka trade where they had 14 games with all 10 of these guys. There was one extra game where they had 8 of them, so I included that within this last year's rotation. Starting lineup of Jackson Hayes, LeBron James, Rui Hachimura, Austin Reeves, Luka Doncic. Bench of Dorian Finney-Smith, Gabe Vincent, Jared Vanderbilt, Jordan Goodwin, Dalton Knecht. Those were the 10 guys that primarily played serious minutes down the stretch over the last couple of months. And looking at the rotation, first thing that jumps out is only 6 guys played 20 or more minutes. 2 of those guys were coming off the bench. They had a placeholder starter in Jackson. And then outside of Jackson, it was 30 minutes a night of centerless basketball and these small ball groups with some combination of LeBron, Rui, DFS, and Vando in the front court. But what jumps out to you with this chart? What jumps out to you with last year's rotation? And how can we apply that to this upcoming season?
Yeah, it definitely stood out to me seeing how quickly and how often the team was going small. I know Hayes ended up playing those 18 minutes a game, but like the first quarter, third quarters, they weren't long stints. the team pivoted very quickly, got DFS in there, and he ended up with, I think, like the fourth most minutes per game, fifth, I guess,
Fifth,
of
yeah.
the group, and that is going to be key time to backfill. And another thing I noticed was with how LA kind of staggered folks, they had LeBron take some rest, and then Austin take some rest, and then Luka take some rest, and we avoided having like multiple of them off the court at the same time. But the other side of that sword is then you have less time with all of them on the court at the same time. And I wonder if Marcus Smart entering in the conversation helps with part of this and allows you to maybe sit more than one of them at the same time by adding his playmaking, adding his ball handling. And, in exchange for that, allows you to play starters more often or play those key guys more often together. I also think he may fill that on-ball, good defender hole that DFS is leaving. And then with Hayes in his minutes, like the situation is going to look a lot different this year with DeAndre Ayton. We'll talk about what we expect from him, but he has played 30 minutes a game in his career and is a guy that I think has shown at the highest level in the finals, not like last year or the year before, but going back several seasons, he's been able to like hedge, switch, drop, has traditionally been more of a drop big. I think that actually fits LeBron and Luka better at this point in their careers with the defensive roles they're going to play. And so I can easily see him, enter in another 30 plus minute per game guy, enter in Marcus Smart, and whether he's the 30 minute per game guy he usually is or 20 that he played the past few seasons will be a key swing factor. But you can easily have 5 starters playing starter level minutes this upcoming season in a way we just did not see last year after AD left the team.
I agree. I view it as them having 6 starters next season without going into our starting group or our minute allotment yet. And for those watching, obviously, you can see this table. For those listening, I'll quickly go through it. So you had Jackson at 18 minutes a night, LeBron at 35, Rui at 31, Austin at 36, leading the group, Luka at 35, and that number was dropped a bit just because of the first couple games. He was on a minutes restriction to start. So really, when you look at Luka had a lot of games, 36, 37, 38 down the stretch of the season. DFS at 29, Gabe at 21, Vando and Jordan Goodwin both at 14, and then Dalton Connect at 7. And remember, he had that stretch of like a month or so where he was playing one first half shift to start the second quarter. He'd play like 4 to 5 minutes. JJ would see if he'd get hot, and then often would not, and then would only play that 4 to 5 minute shift. Austin at 36 minutes led the group, and this is all 15 games I tracked here were with Luka and LeBron. So I think the notion of Austin coming off the bench is ridiculous, and maybe in a different context, if they had different wing defender, like if they had Herb Jones and Trey Murphy on this team, sure, you could maybe talk me into Austin making more sense in a 6-man role and those two guys being the starting wings in between LeBron and Luka. But they don't have that caliber of wing defender or just that caliber of like young 3-and-D type guy in the 6'6" to 6'8" range. So I think Austin is a lock to start, and I think he's going to be in this 34 to 36 minute a night range. And it's really hard to get to that number if he's coming off the bench. It's not impossible, but I think if Austin is coming off the bench, he's probably capped at 30 minutes, maybe 32 at most. And I think for clearly the third best player on this team by, I think, a decent margin, like that's just too few. Like they just, from a talent perspective, they need Austin out there in the mid 30s, I think. And then the second thing is Vando at 14 minutes a night. I know Vando's been another popular guy for the fan base to throw out as that potential fifth starter, but he did not play more than 19 minutes in any of those 15 games, including one game where DFS and Gabe were both out. So in theory, like that could have been an opportunity for him to play more. But in the 36 games he played last season, he only cracked 20 minutes 6 times. And in 5 of those games, at least one starter was out, one front court starter, if not multiple. So I just think when we take a step back and look at the big picture of the rotation and the depth chart, like I don't think JJ views Vando as a starting level player or even a guy who's going to be in the top 6 or top 7 of this rotation. I think he views him as like a 12 to 15 minute a night guy. And maybe that changes with a full healthy offseason with Vando. Maybe that changes with JJ changing some things defensively or schematically or whatever. But I think as things stand, I would easily pencil in, of course, LeBron and Luka in the front court, but like Rui, LaRavia, I think those guys are going to be getting a healthy amount of minutes more than Vando next season.
Yeah, I agree there. It's just, especially looking at Hayes only playing 18 a game, that was the opening. If you're going to play so much small ball and Vando's not even a key part of that and his minutes aren't going up because of it, to me, that speaks to a ceiling with how the coaching staff sees him. I think we certainly saw in the playoffs the ceiling this coaching staff saw in Jackson. So yeah, both of those, I think within this context of this team with this staff, perhaps temper expectations compared to maybe a different roster or a different coaching staff. And then I'm aligned with you completely on Reeves starting versus coming off the bench. I tried to map it out. It just doesn't make sense. You can't make it work. If you try to have him play a normal-ish minute allotment while not starting the game, he has either really bizarrely long stints or short amounts of rest. And in addition to that, you end up with some really wonky defensive roles where you have guys trying to play jobs defensively that they're just not equipped to do. And it just doesn't really work out that way. So on another roster, maybe, but on this one, with the limitations you have with some of the key players that are on it defensively, and just like needing to have them play certain roles, it really just does not make sense to me.
So who do you think should start?
Well, I'm with you with Luka, Reeves, LeBron, of course. Ayton, I think you have in there, and then I would start Marcus Smart. And the way I would run it is Smart would take the strongest perimeter player on the other team, whether that's a lead guard, putting Smart more in a point of attack defensive role, or if it's a wing scorer, you're in a more wing stopper role. You'd have Luka and LeBron kind of off-ball helpers, Ayton anchoring the defense. Maybe you drop. I think drop makes sense as a kind of a base regular season coverage with him. And then Reeves, his matchup will depend on how Smart's matchup looks. He might be point of attack at some points, but most likely he'll be a chaser, Smart at the POA, Luka and LeBron kind of off ball, and Ayton in a drop coverage, not forcing the defense to need to rotate all that much with LeBron or Luka like you would with a hedging defense, nor allowing the offense to really just pick on whichever matchups they want at will, like you would with a switching defense. So that's kind of how I'd run it in the five that I'd have in that group. And I feel pretty good about those five.
Same. That's my starting group. I think the other thing with the defensive matchups with Smart versus Rui versus Austin is if you have Smart defensively as a 1-3 or maybe even 1-4, depending on who the 4 is, you're like, if he's guarding a wing, you still need a backcourt defender out there, right? And if they're playing a team that has two elite backcourt players, like say, for example, that you're playing Cleveland and he's on Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland, you need someone else for that other guy. And for me, if Austin is coming off the bench and you're starting three other bigger forwards, one of those guys is going to have to downscale to defending a Garland or a Mitchell, and that would probably be Rui. And I think that is a notable mismatch on the defensive end. It's just already they've asked too much of Rui defensively, trying to shift down to guarding some threes or even some twos, as we saw in the Minnesota series. And I think him potentially even guarding some ones, depending on how the matchups break up. I just think that would be a mistake. So I think just even from like a matchup perspective, I think you have Austin ideally guarding the secondary backcourt guy, Smart guarding the primary guy, and then Luka and LeBron as the two forwards and Ayton as the center. And then if it is a forward situation where you'd prefer Smart to be guarding that guy, then you could shift him up. And I guess LeBron is the guy who probably ends up having to take, like maybe Luka can hide on someone or goad them into taking some shots that maybe, or trying to exploit that matchup in a way that takes that team out of their rhythm offensively. But I just think from an actual like matchup perspective, if you're going Smart, Rui, LeBron, and Luka, you now have basically three power forwards out there next to Marcus Smart defensively versus Austin, who could defend either backcourt spot. And yes, there will be some matchups that are tough for him, or guys are too athletic or too strong, or teams might try to mismatch hunt with him and pick on him if the Lakers are switching 1-3 or 1-4. But I just think you need another backcourt defender out there, and the other options I don't think have the versatility to scale down to defend ones and twos.
Yeah, it really comes down to the fact that Luka isn't someone you want guarding ones or twos. If they're capable offensive players. If he were a good defender and someone that could defend at his position, then this is a different story and you could start Rui, but Luka's a 3 defensively, and he's been a 3 defensively. Sometimes he'll guard 2s, sometimes 4s. It's generally kind of based on who's the weakest, but his offensive position and his defensive position have never been the same thing if we look at the matchup data. So, yeah, he's a 3 defensively, and if you can think about him in that way, it really helps the other pieces fall into place, and it, to your point, it makes putting Rui out there really, really tough to do unless you're going to go switch everything. Matchups don't matter as much, but I don't see this team operating that way if you're starting Austin, and I don't think that makes the most sense. Ayton can do it, but that's not the optimal way to use him either. So I guess maybe there's a world if like Austin weren't on this team where you throw in another wingy guy and you could try to operate that way, and maybe we get some of those lineups this year where it's Luka, Smart, Rui, Braun, Ayton, and you can switch a bunch if you want to. But for the starters, with how they're constructed, it just doesn't make sense.
Let's take a look at, I'm going to throw my projected minutes breakdown at you, and I'm taking the trends from last season. So it is a little bit more of a top heavy rotation. You have 6 players playing 26 or more minutes, which is a little bit more than last season. You got 4 guys in the 30s, the same as last season. So I have it Ayton at 30 minutes, LeBron at 33, Marcus Smart at 26, Austin at 34, Luka at 35, Rui at 28, Jake LaRavia at 20, Gabe and Vando each at 13, and then Jackson Hayes at 8. So I have Dalton Connect and Maxi Kleba just missing the cut. DK, it's more so just they need a big in theory, right? And they're probably going to be playing less centerless basketball this year with Ayton, and now having a couple of healthy backup centers in Jackson Hayes and Maxi Kleba. I think Kleba's the other guy who there have been some murmurs about the Lakers being interested in what he looks like as a potential 3-and-D stretch big, and maybe he wins the backup job. He is making almost 3 times as much as Jackson Hayes financially, and sometimes that stuff factors into rotation battles, and does have the history with Luka as a 4 and a 5 next to him on a team that both made the conference finals and finals. So what do you think of my allotment here, and is it similar to yours? Like, where are the holes in it? What do you disagree with?
Yeah, mine is pretty close, and I see a couple guys where we are close to each other, and I think others may be upset about it. I am in a similar spot with Vando. I have him at 12 minutes per game. I have LeBron at a similar spot I had him at 32. I did that just because I don't have anyone with an odd number, but 32, 33 was kind of the range for him with me. He's been going down with his minutes per game 3 seasons in a row. And my positioning this year is, I don't know, it's kind of like if you're losing a war, you either need to sacrifice like resources or weapons or land. And for him, I am choosing between, do we get similar level of play on fewer minutes or same minutes on maybe worse play? And I'd rather sacrifice maybe a couple minutes, have him try to be the best he can be while he's out there, and then hopefully fewer minutes helps conserve him for the playoffs. The biggest differences that I have from yours are I don't have LaRavia at the 20 that you've got. I've got him down at 12, whereas I have Gabe and Smart higher. And Smart is one that I really oscillated on because he very consistently played 30 minutes a game like every season of his career up until the past couple since he's left Boston, where he's been playing 20 minutes a game. I had him at 30, but if he's not healthy or he can't play that amount of minutes anymore, that's where I think the team has a tricky situation, and that's where I have Gabe playing 18. He's played 21 in his career. He played 21 last year. He's played 21 in his 2 seasons in LA. But I have between him and Smart giving me 48 minutes of point of attack defense. My question for you is, you only have 39 minutes per game between those two guys. What are you going to do for the other like 20% of the minutes each game where you don't have what I would consider a good point of attack defender on the court? And how does Jake LaRavia kind of fit in from a defensive role standpoint for you?
The way, so I went through a couple of variations of this. I actually had Smart a little bit lower. I had him at 24, then I bumped him up to 26. I think part of my thinking with that is some sort of load management is such a it's such a pejorative that I hesitate to use it, but like some sort of just being cautious with his minutes. And I think like if there are nights you can rest him a little bit more or reduce his minutes just because of the wear and tear the last couple of years and just wanting to get him to the finish line of the playoffs. And can he play 65, 70 games after only playing 54 the past couple of years? So I think with him, it was just being a little bit more conservative with the workload and just knowing his style of play. I think you're going to see him play his ass off for somewhere in that mid to high 20s minutes a night. And so maybe I'm a little bit too low on that. With Gabe, I went back and forth with Gabe and LaRavia. I just felt like, I don't know. I think Gabe, I think LaRavia is better than Gabe. And I don't know if that's a controversial take or not. I also think that if you look at it as Smart, Gabe, and Vando, that's a combined 52 minutes across those three. So I think if you have at least one of those three on the floor, I think Vando can be a point of attack guy depending on the matchup. So as long as you have one of those three, I think you can kind of get away with it. But yeah, I think people aren't going to love the Vando number. I just don't. Again, last year, 14 minutes a night, and was not really featured in the small ball looks as much as you would have expected, as you pointed out. Gabe, maybe it's a little too low, and he should be closer to. I think I originally had him at 18, and I kept dropping him the more I went through it, and it's just tough. Like I could also see that Jackson number go a little bit lower, and maybe they just play more of a 9-man rotation. But I do think LaRavia is I would say I think he's going to play more than 12 minutes a night. I think he'll at least be in that 15 to 18 minute a night, and maybe the 20 is a little bit too high. But I also think if you're looking at LaRavia versus Rui versus Vando versus even Smart, depending on how Smart performs, I think you can make a case that LaRavia has the highest floor on both sides of the ball compared to those other three guys. Like, not saying by any means he's the best player, but I do think there are obviously some major questions with Vando and Smart offensively, and then Rui comes with some questions defensively. I think LaRavia can be close to average, at least on both sides of the ball, which to me gives him some utility where he can function in different ways in lineups. But it's that was the part of the rotation I felt the worst about.
Yeah, I worry about LaRavia's defense. I think that's the limiting factor for me. He, in his 3 seasons in the league, has been if you look at his defensive matchups and the kinds of players he's guarded, the caliber of players he's guarded, his first season, he was in a low activity role, which is basically I wanted to call it the hider role, but we got feedback from agents that they didn't like that. He was hiding year 1. Year 2, he was a helper, so also an off-ball kind of wing defender with F matchup difficulty. Again, not guarding anybody, but at least rotating. And so really the difference between year 1 and year 2 was he rotated a little bit in year 2, whereas year 1 he was standing in the corner, hiding, not rotating, which is not good. That's not where you want to be. And then in year 3, this past season, still a helper, but he did take on more difficult matchups for a helper. But he's never been in an on-ball defensive role. And I think it was easier for me when I first tried to map it out just with the minutes, but when I went to the rotation map and tried to build the actual lineups for 48 minutes, that's where, for me, his minutes started to get crunched, because I was looking at some of the defensive lineups and I was just like, man, like, I don't think these guys can do these jobs. And so to me, that's where I think in this team, within this context, he might, if he plays fewer minutes than you or others are expecting, I think that might be why. But if he can step up and show that he can be an adequate defensive player with on harder matchups more consistently, and he's shown flashes, but if he can overperform and take that next step up, I agree with you, he does have that upside and also that floor to be able to maybe step in as like 5th player, maybe not 5th starter, but fifth or sixth guy in minutes because he's got the spacing. He's super disruptive defensively, very active hands. He's got some bad habits, but like if he can step up and be more solid and navigate screens better on ball, off ball, he's got that potential, and that would kind of change things. But for me, I kind of need to see him prove it. And that's where I am with Hero as well. With Vando, I have most of his minutes as a small ball 5. I see that you have 38 of the 48 minutes per game with the center on the court. For the remaining 10 minutes a game, who's your center there?
Depending on who you consider the center with
Okay.
LeBron or Rui, whenever they're on the floor, like I guess I lean more LeBron, but yeah. So I was struggling because I was like going back to last season again. They had 30 minutes a night post Luka trade of centerless basketball. I think that's clearly going to shift now that DeAndre Ayton is on board. But does JJ say any like look? Because if we're doing this by talent, like you could certainly make the case that Dalton should just reprise his 10th man role as like a 7 or 8 minute a night guy, and Jackson and Kleba should both be out of the rotation. And or maybe that's a rotating role between Dalton and Thero, depending on the needs of the game. But I think they're going to play a little bit more traditional, and Jackson in a bench role as a lob threat. Like you are having 38 minutes of a lob threat rim runner out there, which I think like I really like pairing Jackson with Luka in bench lineups, and that was something that they weren't always able to do just because of the breakdown of the rotation last season, and he was so concentrated with the starting group that it would often be Christian Koloko or Trey Jemison or small ball groups with Luka on the bench, and sometimes even Vando at the 5. And like I just think this, if you can get 1 to 2 shifts of Jackson and Luka, that can really unlock Jackson offensively and just make those second unit Luka and the Goons, Luka and the Banshees type lineups work a little bit better. I think if you have someone like Jackson in there. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think at that 10th spot is where things could really vacillate with Jackson, Dalton, and Maxey all having a real case.
Okay. Well said.
The other thing with LaRavia, and this goes back to last year's rotation and just I think JJ's stylistic preferences, is he really loves shooting. And I think when picking between players, JJ, my read on it has been he defaults toward the better shooter. And you can make a case that LaRavia is the best shooter on the team, or at least in this projected rotation. I think it's probably Rui. Of course, kind of putting Luka to the side, putting LeBron to the side. Among the role players, it's between Rui and LaRavia. So I think especially if Gabe doesn't bounce back as a shooter next season, and if he's still like a 32 to 34% 3-point shooter, I could see LaRavia, if he's hovering around high 30s, low 40s, like that being another difference maker where JJ just defaults to that because he's a guy who can space the floor. Because when we're looking at, if we're looking at the guys around the big 3, Smart, shaky shooter, 1 year as a league average 3-point shooter. Ayton can't extend beyond like 16, 18, maybe 20 feet. Then you get to Gabe, who's been shaky, Vando, and Jackson. So like I just look at this rotation and I'm like, there's not a lot of shooting here outside of the principal shot creators. And I think they are really going to need LaRavia to space the floor around those 3 in some configuration.
Yeah, I could see it. You think Rui's the best shooter on this team? Between him, LaRavia, and Connect?
Well, I was not including Dalton because I don't view him as a primary rotation guy right now. I think all things considered, it's Dalton. And then I think, but I just don't, I don't know, maybe I'm factoring in Summer League too much, but I don't think he, based on the JJ's trust level at him last year and him seemingly not improving this summer, at least as of yet, I don't think he projects to be a rotation player.
Okay. Yeah, I would say of like anything in Summer League to try to carry over, like 3-point percentage, I don't care. I'm trying to ignore it. I try to wipe it from my brain.
Not even that though. It was the disposition. It was the defense. It was.
Yeah. I didn't see the decision making improvement from him. I wanted to see, he was a guy that like, he's a good shooter, but on so many of these off-ball screen plays, like the JJ Redick, Kyle Korver types of plays that JJ loves to draw up, he just did not read the play well, pre-catch or post-catch. and he ended up just jacking up so many dumb, bad, heavily contested shots. And you cannot do that with the faces we're looking at on the screen right now. There are too many good players around you that if the defense is in your face, something's wrong, someone else should be open. And he just has not been able to make those reads. And if you're not going to be the right connecting piece, then that concerns me. And I think LaRavia is on the very opposite end of the spectrum, where I don't think he's like a great, lead guard playmaker kind of guy, but he can be a really good ball mover. And I think that fits in really well. I think Smart can be a great ball mover. That fits in well. Rui's gotten a little bit better at it. Gabe's got some of that. Vando can do some of that. But yeah, I think that is an area where Dalton as well is kind of lacking and falling behind Jake and some of the others. Just being able to coexist with the other stars on this team. He's got that off-screen potential, but he didn't show the off-season growth I wanted to see that makes me think it's going to be any better this upcoming year than it was a season ago.
I'll say this. If Smart or Vincent have a career shooting year, and again, they don't even need to be 40% or even 38%, but a career shooting year by their standards, I think they're less dependent on LaRavia. I just think from a spacing perspective, if you're going the starting group plus Rui, Gabe, and Vando as your top 8, I just think there are some real spacing concerns especially with Austin also not being as reliable of a catch and shoot guy the past couple of years. I just think the spacing the floor can get constricted pretty quickly.
Yeah, I do wonder. Smart's not a good 3-point shooter, but I wonder if there's a little bit more juice to squeeze out of his 3-point game if LA were to put him more off ball. He's generally had really high quality on his catch and shoot threes, as you'd expect, but he still takes a lot of pull-up threes. And that's why his overall full year, all 3-point attempts, shot quality throughout his career has been a D, C, D, C minus, A, C plus, B plus, A, B, B. He's had 0 A plus quality seasons, and there has not been a season with fewer than 1 A plus quality guy on this Lakers roster as long as LeBron's been on the team. So, there's that potential for him to give you a better percentage if he gets easier shots. But also, he's still not that great of a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. He's underperforming there. And the other side of that coin is if you do stick him in the corner offensively, the passing, the facilitating, which has been really the benefit of Smart's game offensively, is also completely taken away. And I think his offensive impact becomes even more negative than it's been thus far in his career. So he's a tough fit offensively. For as good of a versatile defensive fit as he is on this team and how he can play each coverage, offensively, I'm very interested to see how the team approaches him, because no matter which option you pick, it kind of has some friction with how this team might want to operate or how to get the most out of him.
Let's get into our lineups for next season. So I gave you the task of coming up with 3 lineups that you wanted to see. And you could take this a variety of ways, but what's your first lineup that you want to see next season?
So I want to see, I don't know if this is a bad answer or not. I want to see the starters. I want to see the starters a lot. I want to see LA find a way to configure the lineup in such a way where they can get a lot of minutes with Luka, Reeves, Smart, LeBron, and Ayton. I think you can get enough shooting from Smart. If you look at his 3-point shot making and you apply an A+ quality to it, he should be able to give you 34 to 35-ish%. I think that can be enough. I see with this group a dynamic offensive group, but defensively you also have a stopper in Smart. Ayton he graded out 14th best in the NBA last season in our interior defensive metric, EpiBall Index, kind of an overall metric looking at interior defense. And he's just been in horrendous environments with bad defenders and bad scheme around him. There's more there than I think people realize. I think this group can be good enough defensively, but I really want to see what they can do offensively and apply some good scheme to this group. And you've got, I think, one of the best starting 5s in the league, and I think perhaps the Lakers' best playmaking 5-man lineup they've ever had in the history of the franchise. Possibly.
Wow. That is high praise.
I was trying to find some other, but it's got to be.
You have Luka and LeBron, and that is, as we said around the trade deadline, arguably the best playmaking duo of all time.
You've got 2 top tier number 1 playmakers. You have Austin, who's also a number one playmaker, if you're just looking like top 30 in the league as a number one. And then Smart's kind of like a 2 or a 3, depending on how you use him, how he's playing. Ayton, he's in there. He's going to do his job. Passing's not his top skill set, but like the top 4 playmakers in that group, about as good as you can get, I'd say. So I think it'll be fun. I think it's going to be dynamic. And I want to see LA kind of lean on some of the playmaking they do have with the Smart and in Austin, and maybe get some more lineups out there where you have 2 of between Luka, Austin, and LeBron off the court at the same time in order to give this lineup a lot more time than we're used to seeing. Or, well, we've never seen it, but that trio more time than we're used to seeing.
I'm with you. I wish we disagreed here, but that was my first lineup was just this starting group. I think it should also be the closing group, and I think it should be a group that's playing ideally at least 15 minutes a night. That might be even on the low end, but somewhere in that like 15 to 20 minute a night range, depending on the matchup. But I think if they can stay healthy for majority of the season and play 65, 70 games together, like this could be one of the higher usage lineups in the league, and we'll have that sample size of just how good they are. And to your point about the offensive end and the playmaking, like I think this lineup should perform at a top 5 offensive level, and we should see the Lakers actualize their offensive potential around Luka in a way that they weren't quite able to last season. And I think defensively, I have some concerns. Like I keep coming back to, how do you feel about Marcus as a point of attack guy against like point guards and athletic guards? Because when I broke down his film in both Memphis and Washington, and granted, he didn't play that many games, and I only looked at this season because I didn't. Sometimes I feel like we can wish cast things when we go back and are looking at the prior season or like his final season in Boston. Like he has not been that guy the last couple of years, so I there's a chance he gets back to it, but I don't want to just assume that he's going to get back to that. So looking at it, I felt he was clearly better against threes. Like I thought 3 was his best position defensively, and then close between 2s and 4s. But I thought among those, like the first 4 positions, I thought 1s was his weakest position. So I still think the Lakers are kind of in this tough spot where you could maybe argue Austin is still the best point guard defender. And I think it can work in the regular season, but I still think there's a defensive limitation there once you get to the playoffs.
I'll disagree with you. You might be right, but I think we've seen him be one of the premier guard defenders in the NBA for a long time, and for much of his career, he was primarily guarding point guards. He's not been that same guy recently, and from a matchup standpoint, he's been used more and more like guarding up the past couple seasons than we're used to seeing from him, and maybe that's a foot speed issue, and we see some of that on the film, and there are times he gets beat. There are other times where he's able to stay in front, wall off, absorb whatever contact you're going to throw at him, and does a good job keeping his balance, not fouling, putting his hands up. He's got great balance. I think he's got good enough agility and quickness. His screen navigation is really good, and I think that's an immediate boost to this team, and that is a key part of being one of those point of attack defenders. That's something that's been the limitation for Jared Vanderbilt, and is a limitation for some other players we've seen for LA try to trot out in that role in the past. So I think he'll do well enough, and he's got some good rim protection behind him that I am hopeful for it. And I think I saw enough on film that makes me optimistic, but at the same time, as you said, the sample size is tiny. It was hard to try to find a big group of, a big enough sample of film to feel great or awful kind of in either direction. It's very much TBD, and LA should know a lot more than the 2 of us do right now, just because they've seen tremendously more of him than we have just behind the scenes over this offseason, I would imagine. Yeah, so he kind of has to prove it. If he can't, that worries me, because that does then limit a lot of the defensive upside he brings. And I start to, the idea, the theory of this team having that upside to win a title or compete for a title starts to quickly melt away if he can't be that kind of player defensively.
And to be clear, like I think he's going to be a really good defender. I just wonder if he can guard the quick, because that was just something that stood out to me, was the foot speed of it. Felt like he was getting blown by a lot against the De'Aaron Fox types. And it just like, but when he was guarding the Jason Tatum types or some of the bigger wings, because of his foot speed, he's able to hang with those guys. And then he's a brick wall. He's 220 pounds. And I know he's talked about slimming down a little bit, getting in better shape. So maybe that allows him to get back to being that point of attack guy against guards. But also just looking at the matchups and the way that he was deployed, like the three guys he's defended the most the past 2 seasons are not in order, I don't think, but Luka Doncic, Lauri Markkanen, and LeBron James. So I think that is kind of telling in and of itself of like, and again, 54 games, small sample size, but just based on like his post-Boston tenure, he has not been as much of a point guard defender. And his teams, and maybe that's more of a matchup thing or a team need thing, but they've tended to put him more on big ball handlers or wing types. And I just think that's something to monitor, that like, my fear is that he ends up still being more of like a guy who's like best against 3s and 4s, and that doesn't really solve the Lakers backcourt defensive issue. But that will obviously be, excuse me, my throat is chopped right now. That is something that we will see obviously come preseason. What is your second lineup that you want to see?
I am, and I know we talked about maybe the staff not having faith in him, but I want to see a small ball Vando lineup, and the one that I was able to work in, and I want it to be worked in as part of the regular rotation that they are able to get minutes for, build up reps for, figure out the nuances of, and really start to build some confidence in. And that group for me is Luka, Smart, LeBron, Rui, Vando. I don't have Austin out there, and he's going to be part of my next lineup, and a pretty critical one for either of these first 2 ones to operate the way I want them to. But this 5-man group, I think, would switch 1 through 5. I think it would shrink the floor. It would engage in the, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the color. Was it greening, bluing? Greening, yeah. and the flooding and the different defensive tactics the team used to try to just make it really difficult for offenses to get to the rim. And you've got plenty of playmaking offensively, some shooting offensively. You've got Smart and Vando out there together. I think anytime either of those guys are out there, that can be a threat to the spacing of your lineup. But I like what I've got with it. I want to see it, muck up the game, challenge some opponents, and I want to see LA kind of get to the point where they're at, they've got their master's degree in this lineup by the time they get to the playoffs, whereas each opponent has only seen it and played against it for a little bit at a time. I think if you're going to commit to trying to win a title, you need to build in scheme versatility, and I want to see this team and this group get plenty of those minutes by the time they matter. And this would be one way to do so. And I was able to fit it into just a normal rotation map at the end of the first quarter and the beginning of the fourth quarter.
I like it. I really like that group. I had a similar group of Vando, LeBron, Rui, Austin, Luka. So I had Austin in there for Marcus, but I noted that you could, I think those core 6 guys would be the basis of it. You could maybe even throw in LaRavia depending on his role and just how well he holds up defensively, but some combination of those 6 or 7 guys in a 5-man lineup, but with Vando, LeBron, and Rui being the front court core. So in theory, it's probably more between Marcus, Austin, and Luka. Yeah, I would like to see Vando, and then because LeBron and Rui have so many reps over the last 2-3 years of playing smaller at the 4 and the 5 together, I think they have their chemistry there. And then you allow Vando to defend the best opposing scorer, right? And he could defend point guards, he could defend wings. I think you probably want him defending down more than up. And I think that's a place where I have disagreed with how JJ's used him. He's sometimes used him more on 5s or 4s, where I think Vando's better against wings, or we've seen him guarding, like when he locks in and you're not switching everything and you are playing coverage, that's where I think he can be at his best. And when he wants to really lock into a player, that's like you just release Vando and he does his thing. So having him and Smart in the same lineup, I really like that.
Ooh, okay. So I love the lineup. I like the theory. I disagree with you on Vando though. I'm more on the JJ side of things.
Bigs?
I want him defending up because for me, if I'm thinking about what's most annoying to play against, if he's guarding, let's say he's guarding my point guard, I know I can run a ball screen and he's out of there. I don't have to deal with him anymore. Whereas if he's guarding my 5 and I run a ball screen, like my 1-5 pick and roll's dead. And now I have got a strong on-ball defender in front of me. And so I've kind of taken out, like you have to run two actions to kind of get him where I'd want him to be as an offense. And it takes away my like the go-to NBA action. Looking at how he's been disrupted throughout his career, it's been a whole lot more jumping passing lanes off ball than it has been on ball pickpocketing. And so that stands out to me. And like the screen navigation in general, not great. If you're switching, it's fine. If you're not switching, it's a problem. But interestingly, looking at his defensive role, he's had 2 seasons in the NBA where he's played rotation minutes and been a wing stopper. And he's played, 2 seasons as a helper, 3 seasons as a wing stopper. The 2 seasons as a helper have been his 2 most impactful years. And the 3 as a wing stopper have been his 3 least impactful. And I found that interesting. It kind of lines up with my theory there. I don't know if it'll track towards this upcoming season, but he's, for me, when we've seen him at his best, it's often been in like bench mob, switch everything, allow him to be jumping passing lanes when you're engaging those tactics where he shrink the floor. He and I think DFS did a really good job with this last season and was unheralded, just like playing good team defense. And he fits into that really well. And when people want him to play more and go start, and then it's in these lineups where he's not switching, that's where he starts to see his weaknesses magnified, like that screen navigation. If you want him in those on-ball roles, that's not what you're proposing with your lineup. So I think your lineup can kind of work around this. But I like my plan.
Switching in my lab. I'm more so like I go back to last like the playoff series against the Timberwolves, and I think this was more of a DFS specific thing, but it felt like there were times where JJ would try to force against Minnesota. He was guarding Ant, and I just felt like we didn't see much of Vando on Ant, or whenever we did, they would just get the switch off of him, and you could tell they didn't really want Vando as the primary guy on Ant. But I feel like like maybe Marcus Smart is the answer where he can be that primary guy again, and you could use Vando as like the secondary defender. But I think among all the options, he might be the best.
Yeah, you don't, and that was part of my theory with mine is I've got Smart and Vando out there. I get it'll hurt you offensively a bit, but defensively, Smart go take on that lead ball handler, Vando go take on the 5. If you switch, I still feel okay about where I am. If I compare Vando with like DFS and Rui from a defensive rebounding talent standpoint, a metric we have at B-Ball Index, he is tremendously better. And I know that was a weakness of some of the approach LA had last year with Rui or LeBron trying to play the 5. So he plugs that gap a little bit despite not being quite as like a, I don't know, low center of gravity, thick sort of defender. But I don't know.
He's a really good rebounder.
Yeah. We'll see how it works out. But either way, I like that we're kind of on the same page so far. We'll see if we, go in different directions for this last one.
So that was I actually put down 4 lineups because I figured we might have the starting closing group the same as we did. So then I have 2 bench lineups. So I have the Luka specific bench lineup, which again, going back to last season, I felt like they would put too much on his plate offensively, and it would be Luka, Gabe, Goodwin, Vando, Trey Jemison. And it was like, Luka, go do everything offensively. But you are protected defensively, but it was basically, can Luka create something out of nothing here? And I think they need to find a better 2-way balance with some of the Luka-centric bench lineups. So I have here Jackson Hayes, Rui, Jake LaRavia, Gabe Vincent, and Luka. So you have the Luka Jackson pick and roll as the foundation of the offense with Rui, LaRavia, and Gabe spacing. You could also run some secondary actions to get Rui more involved. Like I view him as the second option in this group, and that is a way to maybe appease the transition of him from going from a starter to a bench player, because that's something we didn't really touch on, but like there's been some, let's say, chatter internally that Rui has not loved the concept of coming off the bench previously. Now, this is not post, to be clear, I'm not saying like post Marcus Smart, but just in previous seasons, Rui has tended to be more confident, play better, and prefer to start. And that's how he views himself. So if the Lakers are changing the starting lineup, promoting Marcus Smart, I think there's going to be some level of having to convince and sell Rui on that vision. So this lineup, I think you are having the bread and butter of the Luka Jackson pick and roll with three, I would say, two good shooters and one shaky shooter in Gabe, but like a guy who can theoretically space the floor. And then defensively, you can do some switching depending on the matchups, but you do have Gabe and Rui and LaRavia, I guess, as your three primary perimeter defenders. It's not the best, but this is also against bench units, so I think you should be okay, I think, defensively. But what do you think of that lineup?
Well, this might be bad podcasting. My third lineup is almost the exact same thing, and for many of the same reasons. I have the same group, but with Austin instead of Luka, which is going to be worse offensively. But this to me was if Austin can go cook and then you allow Rui to get some of those more on-ball reps, just like you were talking about, you've got the Hayes roll man thing. If this can be my bridge between the starting group and that small ball group I talked about, the 48 minutes work. And I think defensively it sets up fine where guys are able to play roles that they should be playing. Offensively, you certainly have the spacing, you've got the lob threat, you've got the on-ball guy. If Austin is who we think he is, it should work. And I certainly know Luka is who we think he is, so I certainly think yours would work as well. And if you can get some time with this group and it lets LeBron and Austin get their rest, Marcus get his rest, Ayton get his rest, you've got some really good lineups coming up right before this or right after this. So I like what you've got in mind. And I was thinking a very similar thing. And to me, having Austin out of my small ball group put him then into this one to play some bigger minutes with this specific grouping.
Which that's fair. It's like, Austin, you're not in this group, but go cook for 4 or 5 minutes or whatever. And then final one from me is a LeBron-centric bench group that does feature Austin. So it's actually basically the starting group with just Rui coming in for Luka. And so I was trying to. I also toyed with a version of Vando in place of Rui, but core of it is it's Austin. DeAndre Ayton, LeBron, Rui, Marcus Smart, Austin. So this is setting up for Luka to play with his bench-centric group. The only overlapping player right now between the two lineups for me is Rui, but you are, I think, similar to Luka, sometimes they'd put too much on LeBron's plate, and I think we saw that he was unable last season to carry, especially pre-Luka trade, some of the lineups with some of the more defensive focused type of guys. So that was partly why he had such a bad plus minus and such a bad net rating compared to previous seasons. So I think if you give LeBron in this version, you have Smart and Austin, who are capable ball handlers and playmakers. You also have Ayton as a roll man and post scorer. And then you could have Rui or Vando in there, depending on if you need more offense and spacing or if you need more of a defender. What do you think of that group? Again, basically starters minus Luka with either Rui or Vando in there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I would think the defensive roles work out well. Offensively, you've got enough. Yeah, I think this is a solid group, and I see how it has cohesion with the last group you talked about, where Luka's out there and cooking with the bench group.
What about you? What was your fourth and final
So
one?
this one isn't in my actual rotation map, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that if you have a lineup of Luka, Austin, Smart, Vando, and Hayes, you have an A-, A-, and B+ in your offensive fouls drawn per 75 possessions. This would be the most annoying lineup to play against because these guys they're falling down, they're acting injured, they're taking their time to get up, every screen you set, someone's dying. It would be comedy, it would be entertainment, and that's what the Lakers are. That's what basketball is. And so I don't want it in my 48 minutes, but I sure hope we see it at some point because God, would it be funny and very annoying to play against.
That would be one of the most annoying. We had the one of the best playmaking lineups ever earlier, and this is one of the most annoying lineups ever assembled. And then final thing before we get you out of here, just going through this exercise, and obviously you joked beforehand like how difficult this was to come up with a rotation map and just the numbers, and someone had to get squeezed. And I think for both of us, Dalton and Maxey were the two guys. But going through the rotation, the depth chart, and how you see the lineups, do any remaining needs stand out more than they did previously going to this? Or does it confirm probably need a backup center upgrade, and then ideally, at least in my opinion, a better two-way wing than Smart/Rui? Like ideally, if you could upgrade that fifth spot in the starting/closing lineup and move, I guess, Smart to the bench, and it might cost you Rui depending on who it is. But like, I think Smart and Rui are probably better suited as like sixth and seventh men. And then ideally finding that like two-way guy who can be ideally a plus shooter, attack a closeout, and then defensively multi-positional defender where you have fewer defensive concerns. And that's a tough player to find, to be clear, but those were like the couple of holes in the rotation for me. I still think you're doing a lot of offense, defense substitutions and game planning with this group, and I still think you probably need a better center than Jackson or Maxey coming off the bench.
I don't feel as bad about the center rotation. I think that Ayton can easily get you low to maybe mid 30s per game, probably low 30s per game. But I think for Hayes, he's a good bench big from my perspective. I think he was slotted poorly after the AD trade last year, and we saw him competing against tougher opponents in bigger spots, bigger lineups, bigger minutes, and it was too much. And he still performed gallantly in a lot of those, but we kind of saw by the end that it wasn't a good fit. I think him back as a bench big, I've got him at 12 minutes per game. You had him at 8. I'm comfortable that he'll perform fine in those. I don't know how much I want to invest in upgrading those 8, 10, 12 minutes a game, because ultimately I don't think there's much upside for what you could get out of that. Where I have more concern is my point of attack defense. And having gone through this exercise, my biggest kind of learning point was, like, offensively, it's really easy. You can throw together a ton of different combinations and make this work. Defensively, with Luka being an off-ball defender, LeBron being an off-ball defender, Rui being an off-ball defender that can do some on-ball wing stopping. But like Smart and Vincent were the only two POA guys that I thought this team had that I feel like good about, being on-ball defenders and screen navigators. Some guys can do one or the other. If either of them go down, I worry about how this group will just be able to kind of function and just defend normally. Like, does Bronny get time? Is Thero able to go from being more of a wing defender in college to guarding down at a higher level? I feel like that's a lot to put on him this early in his career. So to me, that is where I have some concern. I certainly agree with you that like a two-way wing, if you can give me a 3-and-D wing or a 3-and-D, I don't know, guy that can play point of attack or wing stopper, that's awesome. If you can plug in Andrew Wiggins, great. DFS, if somehow he could be inserted back in this roster, like, that's fantastic, and you solve a lot of problems. He doesn't check every box you talked about with like attacking closeouts, but that would certainly be a big boost. And if the team were to make a deal, I think that's what I would make it for, because I think it does then slot Smart in his minutes back to a more comfortable spot for me. I have him at 30 and I feel uncomfortable about it given the injury history and how it's gone down the way that you talked about. So I like more of the minute allotment you have for him. And if LA were to go get that fifth starter, suddenly his minutes look much better to me. And I think he's a plus as a sixth guy or as a seventh guy. I think Rui's a plus as a sixth guy or a seventh guy. Like, it just slots everybody appropriately. And so to me, that is point of attack defense, or that just kind of 3-and-D. If it's a wing stopper, fine. If they can play point of attack and wing stopper like Andrew Wiggins has, and I think can, even better. He's not the only guy out there that can do those things, but I know a name that's been in some rumors and news. But yeah, I don't know. In general, this was fun. It was hard. It's always great to be here on a pod that is guaranteed to piss people off. So thank you for that. But one thing I will say is I take all the criticism that I know is coming and I fully reject it. I don't want to hear it. What I do want to hear is I'll post the link. Whenever you post this on Twitter, I'll follow it up with a link. I've created an interactive tool where anybody can go in and you can create your own 48-minute rotation map. and it'll yell at you and it'll tell you when you have no point of attack defenders or 14 helpers in the same lineup. It'll spit out, here are the lineups that you have created and how many minutes they're playing per game. And so you can try it yourself and see how hard it is. Because I think for me, once I did that, people were like, okay, this is pretty good, considering how hard it is to do. It's one thing to come up with the minutes. It's another thing to come up with the 5-man rotations.
Well said. I look forward to it. I look forward to the discourse from this episode. But Cranjis kept you a little bit too long, so I appreciate you going over with us. Where can people find you other than Lakers Exceptionalism and B-Ball Index?
You say that like it's your fault, not mine. Every time I'm here, I think I'm the problem.
We always go over.
It's always good conversation. Always happy to be here. Those are the places. Yeah, Tim_NBA on Twitter. B-Ball Index. Check out the work that the team does. We got a lot of great tools. If you're into data, want to learn more, we got some good stuff there. We're getting close to publishing what we're calling X LeBron, an expected impact metric based on skill metrics. So trying to map out what should the impact of a player be based on their talent grades, and then comparing that with the actual impact to see how well our players and teams optimize. So some interesting new concepts ahead coming up soon there, but check that out. Lakers Exceptionalism podcast. I just posted a bonus pod Q&A today for the folks that are in our Lakers Exceptionalism Discord. So bonus pods each week or every other week. It's more like every other week in the off season. And 24 hours of recorded X's and O's content for anyone that wants to up their scheme game. So check me out. DM me if you have any questions. Happy to explain more.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for hopping on, and thank you all for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back potentially later in the week. I've been wiped out the last few days. I lost my voice. If you guys can't tell, it's barely back. So we'll see. I might be back tomorrow with a mailbag. If not, I'll be back early next week with a new mailbag. I will talk to you then.